Charlie. I spotted him after midnight. I was tired, irritable, and desperate to cross the frontier after negotiating with guards and officials for 11 hours, each time longer and more frustrating than the last. It was exciting at first, a confrontation with an unbending bureaucracy quite different than anything we were used to in the West. But now I wanted more than anything to get into the Ukraine just to be able to crawl into a bed. Then I noticed him watching. He looked wealthy in the subtle way that usually means someone has been rich for a while. Expensive, understated clothes and a trendy haircut. A flat top graying at the sides. About 40, he looked like a successful businessman. But his BMW had red number plates. Diplomatic plates, we found out. And he knew all the guards, policemen, and functionaries. But most intriguing of all, he was also interested in us. Chatting to the guards beneath the fluorescent lights above the customs huts, he would occasionally stare at our small group. I was standing near Russ and David in the darkness, lit only by the lights of the trucks. Ewan was farther away, wrapped in his sleeping bag, on a patch of scrubland trying to sleep while trucks belched diesel fumes around him. The Ukrainian businessman called up a Toyota that had been ransacked for drugs or some other contraband, I assumed, and turning to me, he shrugged. I shrugged back. "Pff," I said, hoping the universal expression for, "What the hell can you do?" meant the same thing in the Ukraine. "Yeah," he said in heavily accented English. "Import cheaper." I took it to mean there was less duty to pay on a car that had been ripped apart or damaged, and went back to discussing with Russ the only real subject of interest. Where were we going to sleep that night? We arrived at the frontier shortly after midday, with the hope of reaching Uzhhorod, about 5 miles into the Ukraine. Now, in the middle of the night, we'd abandoned all hope of getting into a hotel at our intended destination. "I have a hotel." It was the businessman, sidling over to us. "Camelot? Not far from here. You stay with me tonight." He passed over a brochure. His Camelot hotel looked plush and luxurious in that Russian, new money kind of way. I thought it looked like a knocking shop, a gin palace with rich executives, politicians, and high-ranking civilian servants would take their mistresses for long, decadent weekends of sex, caviar, and vodka. But it was a hotel, and we were in urgent need of beds for the night. "Why don't you come and stay?" he said. "It's nearby. Have dinner. Stay late tomorrow. Parking no problem. Garages no problem." I knew I should be suspicious. Plenty of other people besides the old man with gold-rimmed sunglasses had warned us the Ukraine was riddled with mafia. There was nothing to suggest this businessman was a gangster, but surely he would have mafia links, I thought. If you owned a big hotel in Ukraine, you would certainly be paying protection money. I strolled over to where Ewan was trying to sleep and told him about the offer of a hotel.
"Why is this guy prepared to hang around for ages to help out a bunch of strangers?" Ewan asked.
It was a good point, and if we ignored it, we would be disregarding the first lesson of our training for surviving in hostile environment.
Ewan. Jamie Lothar Pinkerton could have stepped out of the textbook for English Army officers. Tall, skinny, patrician, and quietly authoritative, he ran a 3-day course on hostile environments. He trained business executives, journalists, volunteer workers, and government officials bound for the most dangerous places on Earth, including war zones and countries torn apart by civil war and terrorism. And us. We were convinced Jamie was a former member of the SAS, although he never confirmed it and usually changed the subject whenever special forces were mentioned. The walls of the farmhouse where the course took place were lined with pictures of Jamie with men he said he'd known when they were in the regiment or at Hereford. Jamie and his mates, in frogman's gear, or looking disheveled and dangerous in a jungle, or standing behind the Queen Mother at an official function. They were the type of friends and colleagues who backed their cars into parking spaces for quick getaways. and Jamie's conversation was littered with anecdotes about great mates who were built like brick shithouses and were in the— actually, he's in the agency, which we took to mean the CIA. We never managed to pin down exactly what Jamie had done in the past or even how he was currently engaged, other than that it had something to do with security. Charlie tried several times to get Jamie to talk about the SAS. "What does SAS actually mean?" he asked. "Does it stand for—" "Special Air Service," I injected, hoping Jamie might open up. "Oh, yeah, Special Air Service, yeah, isn't it?" Jamie said in the faltering way he used to deflect inquiries. "Yeah, or Scandinavian Air Service, or whatever it is." And then Jamie would return to the subject at hand. How to spot a bomb beneath a car, or evade surveillance, or take cover from automatic gunfire, or floor an attacker, or talk your way out of a kidnap threat, or retrace your steps through a minefield. His lectures were interspersed with medical training accompanied by some of the most gruesome pictures imaginable of gunshot wounds, machete injuries, and limbs blasted off by personnel mines. It seemed there was no threat to life or limb that Jamie had not encountered and dealt with in his efficient and nonchalant way, including meeting bears in Siberia and Alaska, something we were concerned about. "I had an encounter with— I don't know what sort of bear it was," Jamie said. "I'd like to say it was a grizzly, but I wouldn't know one from the other. But it was in a river in Alaska. We just climbed McKinley, and that's the highest mountain in North America. The one they use to train for Everest," Charlie said. Yeah. Anyway, we had a few days off, and I quite liked the old fishing, you know? So I went down to the Seward Peninsula with a mate who's called Phil Batize because he's got one eye that's half closed and he's about 6 feet tall. SAS guy, you know, and all the rest of it. And Jamie launched into another of his intriguing anecdotes. Over the course of 3 days, Jamie impressed upon us that there were several never-to-be-broken golden rules that governed traveling through Central and Eastern Asia. I'd say avoid traveling by night or early in the morning. It's when people— I'm talking about remote areas now— it's when the baddies will want to operate. To them, it's a business transaction, and if they are trying to rob you or whatever, they will want to get away with it. The best chance of getting away with it is under cover of nightfall. So I would say travel by day, Jamie said. "Dress down, don't cause offense," Jamie advised us about border crossings. "If you have to queue for an hour, queue for an hour. Don't try and jump, and never— this is absolutely key— never hook up with anyone else to cross the border."
Charlie. After half a day at the border, our minds were entering emotional meltdown. The Slovak border had been a breeze in comparison to our attempts to enter the Ukraine. We had reams of documents, and the British embassy in Kyiv had been working on our behalf for nearly 7 hours, but all to no avail. The Ukrainian authorities would only accept the original vehicle registration documents for the BMW bikes and Mitsubishi 4x4s. Our laminated photocopies were not up to scratch. We called BMW in Britain, who emailed and phoned BMW headquarters in Munich, who rang BMW in Moscow, who faxed BMW in Kyiv, who contacted the border and guaranteed that the motorbikes belonged to them and that they would not be sold in the Ukraine. Still no movement. As well as Sergei Grabovets, the easygoing, muscle-packed former Russian Special Forces commando, who was acting as our fixer, we'd been joined at the border by Vasily Nisischevsko, a tall, laconic, chain-smoking Russian doctor. Both would travel with the support crew to assist David and Russ. Sergei immediately got to work tracking down his brother, a chief of police who lived near Volgograd, to see if he could help us get through the border. We even heard that the KGB was on the way, traveling 460 miles from Kyiv through the night to persuade the border officials to let us through, but still nothing. "Don't worry, it will all be okay," Sergei said. "So are we moving then?" I asked. Yes, we are moving. Maximum 10 minutes. 4 hours later, having been called in half a dozen times to answer questions, we were still at the border. Then the news we had been waiting for arrived. Two generals, one in Lviv and one in Kyiv, had authorized us to enter the Ukraine. Overwhelmed by the number of people called on our behalf, the guards and officials relented. 2 hours later, we were standing in yet another office block, watching the guards eat their dinner while they discussed what to do with us. The general's authorization had merely allowed us to pass through immigration and passport control. Now we needed to get through customs, run by a completely different set of officials who knew nothing about our predicament. We had to start again from scratch. We need the original documents for the bike, the customs officials chorused in what had now become a familiar refrain. And would it be possible for Ewan to autograph 2 more postcards, please? Claudio, who had been filming using night vision equipment, his camera poking out of a foul-smelling latrine block so that we wouldn't be spotted, had the best advice. There's nothing you can do but wait. They too will get bored after time. Finally, when it seemed we had reached the dead end, the officials got bored and agreed to create a transit paper that would allow us to pass through the Ukraine. Having typed out 10 copies of a document we were unable to read, a customs officer stamped each of them on the front, turned the pile over, stamped each of them on the back, and handed us an invoice. David and I traipsed downstairs, paid a cashier, picked up a receipt, had it stamped, and took it upstairs, where the customs official was working on the second set of 10 copies of the document. Then the whole procedure started again. Back down the stairs with the invoices for the second set, pay the cashier, get a receipt, and so on until we had paid for 5 complete sets of the documents, 1 for each of the 3 motorbikes and 1 for each of the 2 support vehicles. Then the 5 sets of documents had to be taken through 4 departments and stamped in each one. Finally, 2.5 hours later, we were allowed to pass through the border. Ukraine awaits, and then on to Russia, Ewan trumpeted over the intercom, sounding like a conquering general. It was nearly 3 a.m.
Ewan. We were dog-tired and hungry, desperate for a bed, but underneath it, thrilled to bits. I really believe that the delays and aggravations were what made the trip interesting. The journey was not solely about sitting on the back of a motorbike. The motorbike was just the means by which we had chosen to get us from one experience to another. I knew it would be the holdups and mishaps that I would remember forever, and this had certainly been one of them. I loved every drawn-out minute of the negotiations. They fascinated me. And while Charlie and David bargained with the officials, I watched a big old black Mercedes with darkened windows draw up at the border. The door opened and a man in a leather jacket, slacks, and black leather shoes stepped out. Gaunt and narrow, with a cigarette pointing straight out of his mouth, he looked like a weasel. He was the hardest, most frightening man I'd ever seen. Skinny and weedy, but bull shriveling scary. He walked towards me, looked at the bikes with contempt, his cigarette wiggling slightly in his mouth, turned on his heels, and walked back to the border crossing. The car's side window dropped down. Another guy looked out. He was the second most frightening person I'd ever seen. Something in their faces made me feel that killing somebody would mean absolutely nothing to them. To them, the act would just be an irritation. The weasel-like man collected his passport and climbed back into the Mercedes. Just before he sunk into his seat, he turned round and gave the soldier, at whose beck and call we had been all day, such a telling off. A complete dressing down. Really unpleasant. And the soldier, upon whom we had been fawning all day, suddenly looked like a little schoolboy. Head drooped. He looked frightened and subservient. The man with the cigarette clicked his car door shut and drove off. Everyone who had seen the incident sighed with relief. Totally scary man. So when Roman, as Charlie had discovered his friendly hotel owner was called, popped up again just as we were passing through the final checkpoint, I was torn between relief that a bed was in sight and great suspicion about his motives. We climbed onto our bikes and, riding slowly in convoy with the support vehicles, inched our way through the last few checkpoints. Passing mile upon mile of trucks and cars that had been queuing for days to leave the Ukraine, we felt victorious. We'd worked well as a team. David and Russ, flapping at the Slovakian border, had given way to a quiet professionalism. Thanks largely to their efforts, we'd beaten the system. Our documents were not up to scratch, but David and Russ had persuaded the Ukrainian authorities to relent and let us enter. However, the thrill of our success was undercut by a much more basic emotion summed up by Charlie. "I'm so tired I could scream." Faced with the dilemma of whether or not to trust Roman, I thought back to Jamie Lothar Pinkerton's parting words. "This is the final thing," he said all of those months ago as we sat enveloped by the big sofas in his comfy farmhouse. "Trust your instincts. First impressions are usually right, and it applies particularly to survival in the cuds. I really can't stress it enough. If you've got any doubt at all, check and then move in the opposite directions, whatever the context." Now, faced with what might be a critical decision, I was too tired to know what to do. What slightly worried me was that Charlie had met a complete stranger in the queue who was towing a car back into the Ukrainian that had been ripped to pieces by the border guards. And lo and behold, this wheeler-dealer said he ran a hotel, back to which he insisted we should follow him. How could we know he really owned a hotel? I thought it might be completely innocent, but I hadn't been asked for my opinion. Charlie had made an executive decision. I didn't think we should have committee meetings every 5 minutes, but it would have been nice to have been consulted, instead of being told what we were doing. But that was Charlie for you. Sergei advised us not to take up the offer of a bed for the night. David and Russ were unsure, but Charlie had made his mind up.
"It's fine. I got a good vibe about it. Let's go." We drove into the night, deeper and deeper into pitch darkness. Roman had said it would only be 9 kilometers, but it seemed like we had already ridden twice as far. The further we rode, the more nervous I became. It didn't feel right. My mind started playing tricks. Shit, this is not good, I thought. Jesus, he's going to take us somewhere, slaughter us, and steal the cars and equipment. Just as I was thinking we ought to bolt, Roman's car turned off the road to Uzhgorod. I looked down at my GPS. It was indicating we should stick to the main road. I was convinced we should make a run for it, but Vasily, our doctor, was riding in Roman's car, and we couldn't desert him. Following a twisting track for several long, nerve-wracking minutes, we rode further and further into the forest. My stomach was in my mouth. We crossed a bridge, and just as I was thinking we had driven straight into his trap, the lights panned up to reveal a huge pink hotel. Lit by floodlights and surrounded by chalets, it was decorated in a medieval style. So that explained the Camelot reference. Nearby was a row of garages, secure parking, just as he promised. Roman jumped out of his car, all friendly, while 3 security guards in uniform circled him. "Come inside," he shouted, and ushered Ewan and me up the steps. It was like walking into a castle, albeit one more appropriate to a theme park than the Knights of the Round Table. It had ramparts, thick stone walls, arches, and turrets. With our bags over our shoulders, we climbed a couple of flights of stairs to our rooms and bumped into David. "You guys are not going to believe your rooms," he said, his eyes wide with incredulity. Ewan insisted I took the larger room, or rather, a baronial suite of rooms. The dinner room had a table that seated 8. The living room had a leather sofa, 2 leather chairs, and a widescreen television which received all the porn channels imaginable. The walls were covered in replicas of old masters, and the huge bathroom had a jacuzzi and a power shower. It looked like a hotel, but it was still suspicious. "Can you believe it?" I said as Ewan ambled into my room. "I don't really believe it, no. One minute I was in my bivvy bag, on the verge, next to the row of trucks, listening to the voices and choking on the fumes. And the next minute, after some kind of weird video game ride through the dark, we're here. Is this a bit dodgy, or is it just me? I was still convinced they were going to murder us before we went to sleep. Like Hansel and Gretel, they were fattening us up for the slaughter. Worried that we would be overheard, we crept into the bathroom to discuss our predicament. It doesn't really feel right, Ewan said. But am I right to be so suspicious? Maybe I'm being too cynical and it's our first experience of generosity, but I can't stop thinking what's in it for him and wondering what we are letting ourselves in for. The good feeling I'd had about our generous host had turned into a nervous disquiet, but I reasoned that he had spent a lot of money on Camelot and maybe he just wanted to show it off. I don't know, I said. But the upside is you're no longer asleep on the grass verge with lorries going by, and we've swapped border police for 2 or 3 security guards wandering around. What if we go downstairs and he opens a door, and we go down another floor and there's a huge casino full of mobsters smoking cigars and women in tight green shimmering dresses, all playing craps, Ewan said. Look, Ewan. There's his and hers towels, I said, searching for something to reassure me Camelot was just like any other hotel. And he gave me a cuddle as well, Ewan said. I put my bags down, spread my arms to say thank you, and he just gave me a hug as if to say, you're home now. Oh, did he? Maybe he knows who you are. He's just a nice guy. Roman woke up his staff and insisted they cook us dinner. At 4 a.m, we sat down for a 3-course feast in his basement nightclub decorated like a dungeon, but decked out instead with spinning glitter balls, flashing strobes, and a psychedelic light show. This must be a one-off, I said to Sergei, who looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and baggy after all the hard work at the border. It's so wonderfully kesh. No, he said. This is quite normal for Russia or the Ukraine. Roman insisted we all have our pictures taken with him, while Russ, who had had a few vodkas, was all for celebrating crossing the border. But I was suddenly overcome with tiredness, still nervous about being bumped off in the night. I sloped off to bed. Back in the room, I scanned the light fittings and the pictures on the wall for hidden cameras, but found nothing. Then I opened a cupboard. There in front of me was a shoe shine pack with a little shoehorn. When I saw it, I realized the building was a hotel after all, and Roman was simply being incredibly nice. Everything he'd promised he'd delivered. Feeling guilty for being so suspicious, I switched on the television, watched it for a few minutes, and dropped off to sleep in the armchair. Rest at last.
Ewan. I woke early and went outside. In the cold light of day, I could see that what in the wee hours of the morning had seemed such a vividly scary mafia hideout, where gangsters were going to slit our throats and take our money, was nothing more than a very innocent hotel. I felt slightly embarrassed that we had not trusted Roman's hospitality for what it was. The previous night, the hotel had come across like something out of Goodfellas, but perhaps I had been watching too many movies. I reproached myself for being so cynical. Maybe living in a big city like London had made me inherently wary of strangers. It was a habit I wanted to shake off. Wandering through the empty hotel while Charlie and the rest of the team slept, I came across a map of the world on the wall. It took my breath away. Compared with what lay ahead, we had traveled so little. We'd barely begun the journey, and yet I felt that if we had to return home that day, we had already traveled a long way and had a completely fulfilling holiday. Even now, I couldn't conceive of the scale of our undertaking. For months I had been talking people through the map. Now I was sitting on my bike riding it. We'd been on the road for just over a week, and I was getting a sense that we were gradually easing ourselves into the trip. It was like we were trying each day on for size, unsure if it was the right fit for the months ahead. But I still couldn't fathom the distance ahead. The secret, I felt, was to take the journey in little blocks. Morning to coffee break, coffee to lunch, lunch to mid-afternoon break. Hopefully, by then, we would have reached our destination. If not, then push on a bit further until dusk, but breaking it up into chunks. We'd make it manageable. But the moment my mind drifted to the bigger picture, that we'd reached Russia in a few days and then enter Kazakhstan a few days later, the journey became overwhelming and panic set in. I was still missing home and wondering if the feeling would ever go. At least I was no longer riding with a lump in my throat all day every day. The bike ride usually consisted of leaving in the morning and returning home for lunch, or riding to a track day at Donington and coming back the next day. It certainly always involved returning to the place I'd left. Now we just had a huge ribbon of tarmac ahead of us. It would just keep coming at us, and we would just keep heading east, knowing that we would not return to the place we passed. It was quite a bizarre feeling, and every mile took us further away from home, further away from our families, and increasingly, I felt the loneliness of not being with my wife. But accompanying the moments that tugged at our heartstrings, there were times of great wonder, and ever so often, flashes of magic. Like when we were riding at the end of the day, and the sun, setting in the west, warmed our backs and threw our shadows ahead of us on the road, just chasing our shadows as we headed east, all the way around the world to get home. The magic continued when we set off that morning. Western Ukraine was stuck in a time warp. Nothing seemed to have changed in the landscape or the way of life for the best part of a century. It was deeply agricultural country with small villages, farms, horses pulling plows, and lots of women working on the land, while the men seemed to have nothing better to do than sit at the side of the road, watching the occasional vehicle pass by. The roads were rough, gravel-strewn and potholed, a challenge at first, but good fun once we got used to them. The Ukrainians appeared to have spent all their money putting up mobile phone masts and had forgotten the roads, but it was nothing the bikes couldn't cope with. Then came a call over the radio. It was David. We're approaching our first bit of drama. At the edge of a village, a barrier had been pulled down across the road. The guard was standing beside a hut. We didn't know if he was a policeman, a soldier, a government official, or a local bandit. They just want to see our papers, Sergei said with a resigned air. It would be okay. It was local police. They wanted to see our vehicle registration documents, and again, photocopies would not do. It had to be the originals. I assumed it would be another 12-hour delay, as at the border, and I rather hoped it would take that long. I needed a nap. How perfect, I thought. There are some trees at the edge of the road, and I can go to sleep under one of them. We sat at the edge of the road, smoking to pass the time, waiting for something to break the impasse. From now on, it wouldn't be a case of holdups just on entering our new country. There would be delays and checkpoints right across every country until we reached the Pacific Ocean. What do you think? I asked Vasily, our doctor. As usual, he had a cigarette on the go and a smile creasing his hangdog expression. This was a man who had decades of experience of Russian and Central European bureaucracy. He knew how to wait, how to keep nodding, how to chivvy things along ever so gently, never threatening or controlling the officials as we might in the West, just making sure that we weren't forgotten and that eventually we would get what we needed. You want to know what I think? He said in his thick Russian accent. Nobody promised us the trip would be easy, but it would be okay. You have to be patient. While Ukrainian trucks, coaches, and cranes passed through the checkpoint, we waited and explored the village. Except for the strip of tarmac passing through its heart, it had probably never changed. There were old peasant women, their heads wrapped in scarves, clutching babies. Children were drawing water from a well. 2 young lads were driving a gray mare pulling a wooden wagon, its wheels clattering on the ground. 3 women, dots in a huge field, were tilling the earth with large Dutch hoes, while the local men in flat caps sat on a bench, doing what Ukrainian men in rural areas seemed always to do, watching the world drive by. A grocer's shop was well stocked with basic provisions such as sausages and chocolate, giving us a chance to exercise the few words of Russian we had learned during the months of preparation. Privet, spasibo, chetri. I wished we'd taken the Russian lessons more seriously, but by smiling and pointing we managed to buy a few groceries. The housewives in the shop asked us where we were from. Angliski, we said. They gabbled back in Ukrainian. Ruski was not good, they made clear. But not having a clue what they were saying, we could judge only by their body language. All nudges and lascivious giggles. This unplanned stopover had been the highlight of the trip so far. Unencumbered by the trappings of fame and celebrity, at last I was meeting real people in their own surroundings. I just wanted to be quiet and wait to be allowed through the checkpoint. But Charlie was rushing around like a blue-arsed fly again. So I took myself over to a well and sat down on the edge of it. A little old lady came out of her rickety wooden house and joined me. She fed her cat and started to chat in Ukrainian. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but it didn't seem to matter. I just listened to her voice, and then I told her about us. She touched my forehead and crossed herself several times. I got the impression she was saying that I'd been sent to meet her, but there was no way to know for sure. We sat for a long time, the old lady muttering sweetly all the while. I was so happy to sit and chat with her. I think she was trying to tell me about her life, talking about the war and how terrible it had been. It was amazing to think she had probably lived in that house all of her life. At one point, she said she would pray for me. I told her we were going a very long way and that it would be very nice if she prayed for us. It was beautiful, and I'll never forget her. She really touched me. She was a gorgeous woman with beautiful eyes, a real sweetheart. I could have listened to her all day. She didn't know what I was saying either, but again, it didn't really seem to matter. I was so content just to listen to her stories, and I was really disappointed when I heard that at last we'd been let through the checkpoint.
Charlie, we continued on through western Ukraine, bound for Lviv. It looked incredibly poor, and indeed some of the Ukrainians were plowing the fields by hand. I saw one man slowly pushing a hand plow over a long, thin field. It was a pitiful existence, and the whole landscape looked black and white, no color, nothing. Almost every little village we passed through was empty. The only people we saw looked very old and thoroughly worn out. They just sat in front of their fences gazing at the road. A few young kids wore wind cheaters that were too tight for them. Occasionally, a blacked-out Mercedes would sweep through at 90 miles an hour. Mafia or gangsters, we assumed, who could have given a fuck about the state of their country. The poverty was quite staggering, particularly as it seemed so close to home. It had taken us only a week to reach the Ukraine, yet it was another world. By the evening we had reached Lviv, another long day riding of more than 160 miles on broken roads, interrupted only by a visit to a beautiful church in a small village and a coffee stop at a roadside hut. Wherever we stopped, the people were incredibly helpful, not least at the hotel in Lviv. Claudio asked where we could park our bikes safely, and the manager said, "Here," pointing to the foyer of his once grand ornate, but now slightly down at heel palace of hotel. Ewan rolled back the carpet, and we rode the bike up a couple of stairs, through the double doors into the lavishly decorated hall, laughing at the ridiculousness of trying to turn the heavy bikes around on the slippery polished marble floor. We washed, changed, and walked around the city with Andrei Hunyak, a Ukrainian friend of Claudio's. Like so many Eastern European cities, Lviv was a beautiful place. Classical buildings, big squares with old men playing chess, but of the roads cobbled and uneven. Over dinner, Andrei, who was studying linguistics at Lviv University while working as a database administrator, told us about the difficulties of finding a job in the Ukraine. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you don't build a free market in just 10 years. It's only been 13 years since the Ukraine gained independence. It's nothing, he said. We asked him about the change from communism to democracy. It was pretty dodgy, he said. All you could get was the bare necessities. You couldn't buy clothes. There was nothing on the shelves in the shops. Everything was just empty. It was ridiculous. Now we've got plenty of on the shelves, but we haven't got money to buy it. It's too expensive. We'd heard similar stories in most of Eastern Europe. Passing through the Czech Republic, a few weeks before it joined the European Union, we'd found many young people still living with their parents, unable to afford a home of their own, and expecting property prices to raise even more once their country was part of the EU. Many people in the Ukraine spoke at length about the mafia, but nobody would let us use this in the documentary. It was a potent indication of the hold the mafia had over Ukrainians and their country, possibly greater than the fear instilled by the communist regime 15 years earlier.